Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Become More midweek podcast, which has been taken over by this study on Wesley's own words. So apologize, everybody, for the long break there. Had this little thing called Christmas, and then New Year's, and then we're experiencing quite some cold weather here in the great state of Colorado, if you can believe it. And so I kind of delayed the start of the class, but we are back in action, and we are continuing down our path with Wesley's advice to people called Methodists. So we have talked about Wesley's general rules, and as a reminder, that was actually written before this. And the biggest thing to remember as we get into the paragraphs we're going to deal with today is kind of this foundational purpose that we have to this whole thing, where in the general rules, Wesley never uses the word Methodists, right? He's starting this new thing, this new movement within the Church of England. He hasn't really called it much other than United Societies. That's what he called it, our United Societies. But other people take to calling them Methodists. And so by the time we get a few years later and he's writing the advice to people called Methodists, he's embracing that name. And he's trying to say what it means, right? So other people have given Wesley and Wesley's group this name, but this whole project he's on right now, especially with advice to people called Methodists, is to say, okay, they call us Methodists, and we can't stop them from doing that. But what we can do is tell them back what it means, right? So they think they know what they're saying when they call us Methodists, but we're going to tell them what it really means to be Methodist. And so that's the whole project, and that's going to come up a couple times in today's reading. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. We're on paragraph 9. If you've downloaded the handout to go along with this, you want to follow along, or hopefully if you're watching these on YouTube, we actually have been posting the things in the description, the texts for that day in the description as part of it. Just an easier way to do it. All right, so he has talked to them before about, not judging others who, basically saying Methodists have a particular way, or as he likes to say, peculiar. But we have a particular way of looking at the world and moving through the world, but we're not to judge those who have a different way of working through the world or moving through the world. So he said that. And now in verse 9, on chapter 9 or paragraph 9, as I have numbered them, he's going to talk some more specifics about life. All right, so number 9 starts, your strictness of life, taking the whole of it together, may likewise be accounted new. I mean, you're making it a rule to abstain from fashionable diversions, from reading plays, romances, or books of humor, from singing innocent songs, or talking in a merry, gay, diverting manner. Your plainness of dress, your manner of dealing in trade, your exactness in observing the Lord's day, your scrupulosity. When is the last time you heard the word scrupulosity? I've never heard it outside of this. Your scrupulosity as to things that have not paid custom, your total abstinence from spirituous liquors, parenthesis, unless in case of serious necessity, end parenthesis. Your rule, quote, not to mention the fault of an absent person, in particular of ministers or those in authority, end quote, may justly be termed new, seeing although some are scrupulous in some of these things and others are strict with regard to other particulars, yet we have not found in any body of people who insist on all these rules together. With respect, therefore, both your name, principles, and practice may be considered as a new people. Whew. All right, that was a long paragraph, and it had a lot of words in it. If you didn't completely follow along because it's 17th century English, I understand. The biggest, most important thing about that is that this is a sandwich paragraph, and at the top and the bottom, he is making an argument that Methodists are new. Right? And he's doing this for a very simple reason. He does not want people involved in Methodism or others outside of it to dismiss Methodism as just some other thing, right? Oh, you're just like the Moravians, you're just like the Quakers, you're just like one of those other groups that's already gone through and didn't live up to their potential and blah, 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 right? And so he's very much saying, no, you can't lump us in with everybody else. Or other groups before or after or during us. We are our own thing. So that is his argument. We are new, right? He's arguing this is new. Whether you want to believe it's new or not, whether you want to say it's similar to something else that had happened before, whatever, we are new because we have a unique combination of things. There's not one thing. This is very, very important. In all of Wesley's writings, he never says there is just one thing that makes Methodist Methodist. There's not one doctrine, one theological statement, one mission or purpose, nothing. There's not one thing that makes us who we are. It is the totality of all of the things, right? And so he's like, it is the unique combination. We have what he will eventually go on to term inward and outward holiness, right? We have personal holiness and social holiness. We have inward holiness and outward holiness, right? It's that both and thing, right? We concern ourselves with dealing fairly with ourselves and others and the world as a whole. We deal fairly with them with our scrupulosity. There you go. There's your vocab word for the day, scrupulosity. So we concern ourselves with that, but we also concern ourselves with, maintaining the Sabbath, about our personal, spiritual, and faith development. We do both those things. Okay, and then that middle chunk where he's going through and articulating all of these things that Methodists are about, that list should sound very, very familiar because some of it is actually directly lifted from the general rules, right? So in here, he's basically referring back to the general rules, and he's giving a highlights course of, the do no harms and do goods. He had that do no harm by and lists all the things that he believes does harm. And then he says do good by, and he lists all the things that thinks is doing good. And he says maintain God's ordinances, or stay in love with God. And then he lists the things that help us do that. So he's basically giving an overview of that. So we don't need to dive deep into that. If you're curious about all those things, especially there's a whole episode of this podcast about, liquor in case of necessity. We don't need to rehash all of that. Just know that that's what he's about. He's basically saying that the general rules are focused on do no harm, do good, stay connected to God. That is what makes us us. The unique combinations of our cares and concerns and beliefs is what makes us us. There's no one single itemized belief or way of being that makes Methodist Methodist. It's the combination of all of them. And because of that, we get to be a new thing. Okay, so that's the big thing. We're new. Now, this is new in Wesley's time, 300 years ago. Methodists are not new today, though you may be new to Methodism. So he's not letting others dismiss us by just saying, oh, you're just like these other people over here. He's like, nope, we are a unique and beautiful snowflake as Methodists, and we care about things in a particular way that nobody else does. Okay. Easy enough. That is paragraph 9. Let's go to paragraph 10. Another peculiar circumstance of your present situation is that you are newly united together. So not only are they new, right, as a whole, like Methodism as a whole is new as an idea, but they are a new group of people, right? They are people who are coming together from different places, but they are gathering, probably in a new place as a group, as the first time that particular group has gotten together. Individuals may know other individuals within the group, but as a gathered body, they are newly united together. That you are just gathered, or, as it seems, gathering rather, out of all other societies and congregations, right? So it's not just individuals joining it, but there's groups of people, pockets of people that maybe knew each other from another group, another social group. This is a time when there are all kinds of social groups, right? All kinds of societies. This is where the Masons, come from, which were literally just a society of bricklayers, right? That's what they were. or, different, there's exploring clubs or, things that we might call like book clubs today, but much more serious, things like that. So there's other groups, other congregations, other societies that are being formed, and, small subsets, groups within those larger societies are becoming part of Methodism, but they're coming from different groups and societies. Okay. So they're coming out of all the other societies and congregations. Nay. Oh, I love a good nay. Nay, Wesley says, nay. Nay, and that you have been hitherto and do still subsist without power, parentheses, you are a low, insignificant people, end parenthesis, without riches, parenthesis, for you are poor almost to a man, having no more than the plain necessities of life, end parenthesis, and without either any extraordinary gifts of nature or the advantages of education, most of your teachers being quite unlearned and in other things ignorant men. Methodism begins as a movement of what we would call today the working class and the working poor. Right? There isn't much of a middle class in Wesley's time. There's just starting to be with it because there is merchants and things like that. But Wesley lives in a very, very segregated society that is segregated by class, right? Not segregation the way we're used to thinking about segregation, which is predominantly in terms of race. Wesley lives in a world that is predominantly segregated by class. And this starts because you've got things like kings, right? So you've got kings. And then you've got, their family. They got the royal family. And then you've got nobles. And then you got lesser nobles. And then you've got, dukes and earls and all this other stuff and people with title and people with land. We talked about during the class, there is not a lot of private land or public land in England. It's all owned by somebody, because even that which we would consider, public land at this time was all owned by the king, right? If you were the king, you owned all the public quote unquote land. So people, it was really, and so if you didn't inherit land, right? If you didn't inherit land, it was hard to become a landowner because there just wasn't much to go around. And there's a lot of people living on a small island. Education is not free. Like, that is not a thing. So if you want your child education, you have to pay. A lot of people couldn't pay. So it's still a time where people are, you learn the trade that your parents did, and you continue in their footsteps. So that's just kind of how the world works. And so a lot of people didn't read, or weren't educated, even to a high school level of education that we would consider kind of the most basic, level of education today, right? I mean, you got to at least have that high school certificate, or diploma. Most people were not walking around with that level of education, far, far, far from it. And there was a great amount of illiteracy still, not as much as there had been before, for sure. But, even comprehension was a lot lower than it would have been today because people didn't read a lot. So they don't have power. They don't have land. They're not, noble-blooded people. They're not the important people. They don't have money. It is a movement of Methodism begins as a movement of the working class and the working poor. And that's just how it is. That's who gets attracted to Wesley's message and his understanding of who it is. Again, as was pointed out in the in-person class, this is not unlike how Christianity started. It is not unlike who was attracted to Jesus, right? Yes, there were a few people, Levi the tax collector and all of that probably had a little bit, some coins to rub together. But most early Christians were not that, right? They were the poor of their day, the working poor, working class of their day. That's how Christianity began. And Martin Luther would see the same thing. When he began the Reformation about 100 years before this time, Martin Luther attracted people who felt exploited by the church. And it was the kind of the poor and peasantry that felt the most exploited by the church at the time. So that's who gets attracted to his message. And now Wesley comes along, with this idea of doing no harm and doing good and living, a good life, but also supporting one another and caring about one another and, saying that we should live in a world where we support and care about each other. That's all great. But who gets attracted to that message? Well, People who are excited about it are, again, kind of the working class folks. So they are a new people. This is what we're learning about Methodism right now. At the time that Wesley's writing this, he's like, you're a brand new people. You're a brand new thing trying to live in a new way that, in a new way that is a combination of beliefs and practices that has not been practiced yet before. And, oh, by the way, those of you who are doing it are, the least, the last, and the lost, right? You are the uneducated people with now, financial or, resources, for you. So that's who's beginning it. All right. So he continues this argument. Again, he's still arguing Methodist distinctiveness. So we're distinct because we're new, and we're distinct because most of us are poor and ignorant. Great. Paragraph. I don't know how long it's taking me saying Paragraph 11. There is yet another circumstances which is quite peculiar to yourselves. Whereas every other religious set of people, as soon as they were joined to each other, separated from their former societies or congregations, you, on the contrary, do not. Nay, you absolutely disavow all desire for separating from them. Okay. Well, hold on, one more sentence. You open and continually declare you have not, nor have you ever had such a design. The Church of England was that. It was the Church of England. The king was the head of it. It was a big deal. And it was the thing everybody did. It was the state religion. And if you are like me in the United States, we don't have a state religion, so it's a little hard for us to understand. But it was the state religion. It was funded in part, through the state. It had a lot of power and a lot of influence on society. That was kind of unique in its time, or unique to a state religion. So, it's a hard thing to leave, but still people did. And so there were dissenting, as they were called, dissenting churches in this time. Some of the most famous, would be actually, those who would come to become us, here. So, you talk about the Pilgrims, the Pilgrims, what we talked about with the Pilgrims. Oh, they were searching for religious freedom. Like, well, because they were Puritans. And the Puritans, did not want to and did not associate themselves necessarily with the Church of England. And they were trying to do a new and different thing, or a different thing, and live in a different way. And that's why they were persecuted, because they were kind of challenging the rule and the authority of the religious leaders in the Church of England and saying, no, there's another way to go about this. So that becomes, one of the challenges, that they have. And they eventually, that's part of the reason they come here. The persecution is so great where they are, that they just leave. Right. And so they decide to come here. Now, what's funny, if you know anything about the Puritans, it's that they were not a fun bunch, right? They were very strict. The things that they did care about, they cared about very, very deeply. And so for them, they came here searching for religious freedom, but it was also the freedom to tell everybody else what to do. Right. I mean, they had a very, very set way of living. If you think about, if you were made to read the Scarlet Letter, a very good understanding of Puritanism and what that looked like and everything. So not exactly a happy-go-lucky fun bunch, I do have to say. But there's that. There's other parts. I mean, there's still Roman Catholics especially in the British Isles, in Ireland especially. Up north, in more towards like the Scotland area, there's actually more of a Presbyterian style movement. John Calvin and his kind of teachings and Presbyterianism kind of takes root there. And then there's, little one-offs, Anabaptists, Moravians, things like that. So there is a little bit of diversity of within the world of the church. And typically when people do that, it's because they're mad. They're upset at something about the church. And so they want to go and they want to do their own thing. So as Wesley points out, typically what happens is when you have a critical mass of people, which is probably not very much, you try to break away from, the church that you belong to. You go and you start to do your own thing. And sometimes this brought persecution with it. You basically stop showing up in church. Wesley's like, don't do that. And in fact, even when, shortly after this, when Methodists would start building meeting houses, they were just that, meeting houses. They did not hold worship there. In order to, observe the Sabbath, ritually, right? He says, you are really, really good about observing the Sabbath. Well, that meant going to church. And he meant a Church of England church. He meant your local parish church. You were to go there and you were to take communion, right? Wesley was huge into taking communion, wanted everybody to take communion. You can only take communion within the confines of a parish church, a Church of England church. They did not do communion at the Methodist, services. Those happened during the week. They were, prayer meetings and small groups and accountability meetings, and then eventually become like preaching and teaching meetings. But it was not worship in the way that we understand worship, and it was not meant to be church all by itself. And so the one thing that Methodism actually does is it gives people new reason to actually attend worship on Sunday mornings. And, probably people who were maybe not all that great about it before. And Wesley insists on they doing that. And on one hand, you might think, well, that's great, right? Why would anybody be upset at Methodists if it's encouraging people to go to church? Well, Wesley kind of already answered that question when he's reminded them who they are, because who is he encouraged to go to church? The working class and the working poor. That's not who the local churches of the day are really set up to serve, right? It's not who's paying the bills, and it's, the church itself is part of the class structure, part of the power structure of, any community that it's in, and it's pretty high up the chain. Right. So, especially pastors and, church leader, local church leaders and everything like that, they're, part of the bourgeoisie. I mean, they're part of the kind of higher class of people. This is a day when you would actually have your own pews and you would pay rent on the pews that you have, right? You'd get a little pew box and that was yours, your family thing. You'd pay rent on it. And if you couldn't afford that, like most people couldn't, then you were in the standing room only section in the back or in the balcony. And so what Wesley's doing is he's basically crowding, the SRO area, but he's doing it with all these, poor people, but he's saying we're not going anywhere, right? We're part of this because, again, Wesley's starting a reform movement. He's not starting his own denomination. Methodism was never meant to be its own denomination. We were supposed to be a reform movement of the Church of England that brought renewed health and vitality and focus on discipleship to the Church of England in much the same way. And Wesley never stops being part of the Church of England. He never stops being a pastor in the Church of England. And it really wouldn't be up until right before and then after he dies that the church really would start to go its own way and form its own denomination, because it was just Wesley was so dead set on them not doing that. So, I mean, that's what it is. And again, in that way, he's not unlike Jesus. Jesus never stopped being Jewish, and he was, really starting a reform movement amongst the Israelites, right? He wanted to, that was his goal. And so there's a lot of overlap there. All right, so they are not. You have openly and continually declared that you have not nor have ever had such a design. But that's not the end of the paragraph. He keeps going. What does he say? Well, and whereas the congregations to which those separatists belonged have generally spared no pains to prevent that separation. Basically saying the congregations that had people leave to go and try to do all their own things worked hard. Those separate, they worked hard to keep them in the church. They're like, no, you can't leave. You're trying to leave, but you can't. We don't want you to leave. No leaving for you, right? Spared no pains to prevent that separation, semicolon. Those to which you belong, spare no pains, not to prevent, but to occasion this separation, to drive you from them, to force you on that division on which you declare you have the strongest aversion. So when the other groups tried to separate the leaders, the local leaders in the congregation, was like, no, you can't go. But when those who belong or becoming affiliated with this new Methodist thing look like they may possibly be trying to start their own thing, they are literally getting pushed out the door. What, pray tell, do you think the difference might be between those other separatist groups and the Methodists? Could it be where they fall along the ladder of classes that is so important at this time? Yeah, you would be right. Most of the other ones, most of the other, organizations, these separatist dissenting churches that get set up are being set up by, possibly wealthy people, probably educated people who have some kind of doctrinal or theological bone to pick, people who are just seeking to have more power, right? If you can control, if you're not able to become the leader, of your current church, then gosh darn you, go start your own one where you can be the leader. All those other motivations for leaving. And so, they are, so the congregations that they are part, kind of fight hard to keep them and convince them to stay. Whereas this working class, working poor group of folks to which Wesley is a part of, well, we can show them the door, apparently. So, yeah. So this is important for him to mention, right? Because he's reminding them, you are not trying to leave, even though the world may be trying to get you to. All right, then the last paragraph for today, paragraph 12. Considering these peculiar circumstances wherein you stand, you will see the propriety of the second advice I would recommend to you, or propriety, sorry. You will see the propriety of the second advice I would recommend to you. So we're on paragraph 12. And we're only just now getting to his second piece of advice. Oh my gosh, this guy's hilarious. He's so wordy. Do you not imagine you can avoid giving offense? Do not imagine you can avoid giving offense. Your very name renders this impossible. Perhaps not 1 in 100 of those whom use the term Methodist have any idea what it means. To 99 of them, it is still heathen Greek. Only they think it means something very bad. Either a papist, a heretic, an underminer of the church. Sorry, my phone just rang. A heretic, an underminer of the church, or some unheard of monster. I love that. Unheard of monsters. That's what we are. And in all probability, the farther it goes, it must gather up more and more evil. It is vain, therefore, for any that is called a Methodist ever think they of not giving offense. So basically what he's saying is if you tell people you're a Methodist, they're probably going to have a reaction to that, you saying that, and it's probably not going to be good. You're right. In many ways, the brand is already tarnished. Again, because it was a designation that was given to us by people who didn't like us. And it is one that is being, kind of reclaimed. If you will. And Wesley is trying to reclaim it. He's not going to fight being called a Methodist. He's going to change what it means. Most importantly for those who are actually called Methodists, right? So he's like, okay, let's embrace it and say, yep, okay, this is what we are, and this is what we think it means. Well, those who are not, have probably only heard the bad rumor mongering. Oh, this is a separatist group. They're trying to leave the church. And Wesley says, no, we're not trying to do that. They're papists, right? They're trying to bring back the Roman Catholicism. He's like, no, we're not doing that. Heretics, they're heretics. They don't believe in Jesus, or they don't believe in Jesus the right way. No, Wesley's like, no, his doctrine is right in line with the Church of England. Or unheard of monster. We are an unheard of monster, right? Like we are new, but the new thing we are is bad, is what he's saying. And so he's basically like, he's basically calling him like, yes, we should embrace the name. We should define what it means. And we shouldn't hide from the fact that if we do that, the first reaction people are going to have is probably negative, because whatever they have heard, it's probably not been good, but it's also been incorrect. And I think he's kind of falling back on this like whole idea of, there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? It's like, as long as they're spelling it correctly and they're talking about us, that's all that matters. And in a way he's right? I mean, it does open up an opportunity for conversation. If you tell somebody, just from a very practical perspective, you tell somebody that you're a Methodist and they have a very negative reaction because they've heard some rumors about it, they may ask you some questions, right? They may go, oh, I heard you guys like sacrifice puppies to a pagan god. And they're like, no, we don't sacrifice puppies to a pagan god, or whatever unheard of monster that they said. Okay, great. And now you get to have a conversation with that person, right? Now you get to talk to them. It's like, well, no, that's not actually what it is. Here's what we actually do. Here's what we actually believe. This is where we go. This is what our meetings look like. Oh, and there's this guy named John Wesley comes around every once in a while. He's a great preacher. You should hear him, right? It builds curiosity and interest. If you were to go and say to somebody, oh, I'm a Methodist, and they have never heard of that before and have no idea what it means, they're probably going to look at you and go, oh, okay, that's nice. Because nobody likes to look dumb, right? And think, I don't know what that is. Should I know what that is? I don't know what that is. And they just don't have any reason to care, right? They're like, I don't know what you're talking about, and I also just don't care. This way they care, right? They're just like, oh, like I heard that's terrible. Like I want to talk to you. Why are you involved in this terrible thing? I thought you were a reasonable person, right? And it gets the conversation going, and you get to set the record straight, and you get to, correct, the misunderstandings. I think this move on Wesley's behalf, one of the multitude, he made so many brilliant moves. This one is brilliant. He's like, nope, let's just lean into it. And then he starts writing things like this. So everybody has a very clear understanding about what this is, right? We are the people who do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. That's who we are. We love our neighbors, we love God, and we love ourselves. We don't engage in, frivolous or silly activities. We don't take advantage of people. We don't take advantage of the government by trying to not pay our taxes, right? We treat everybody with respect. We expect them to treat everyone else with respect, right? We serve our neighbors. We love Jesus. We prioritize our faith and our faith development, right? All these things that most people look at and go, well, that's a pretty good idea. Those are good things that you were spending your time wondering about and worrying about, and it's just a way of getting the party started, just getting that conversation started. So I think it's brilliant that he leans into this. I think it's great. So, all right. So that's some of the peculiarities. And the second piece of advice that Wesley gives us about who we are. We are a new people made up of people that, a group of people, the working class, working poor. So basically we are a new group of people, a group composed of people that most everyone else who is not themselves poor probably doesn't care about, right? So we're not the big important people. We're not the fancy people. We're the simple everyday folk trying to live life better. Unfortunately, the rumors about who we are have traveled fast and far, but at least that gives us the opportunity to have conversations with those and set the record straight, and get them curious, right? Curious about what they've heard, curious about what's actually going on. Amazingly, Wesley finds a way to turn all that negativity into, its own, into his advantage and to the advantage of Methodists in general. So, yeah, so I guess the lesson is be peculiar, right? Just go on and understand that we're a strange bunch, and we're going to keep on being a strange bunch. So, all right, I hope you've enjoyed this. We got quite a bit of this left to go. This is not a short writing. It's about twice as long as the general rules are. So definitely got at least 2, 3, maybe 4, some more sessions on advice to people called Methodists. But I am really grateful for you tuning into this. If you found this interesting, share it with your friends and family. Send them links to the podcast or the YouTube video, however it is you're watching it. All of that really, really helps, and just lets us keep doing this thing that we're doing here. So, all right. Well, always consider joining us worship at 9:30 live. You can join us on live stream, johnstown.church/live, through our YouTube channel, Facebook, wherever it is you find such things. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Until I see you again, have a blessed day.